Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I think I was last here speaking to you, I was going to say 20 years ago, but I think it was probably more like 25 years ago. And in those days, I was interested in these things. I was working for the RSPB at Inchmarshes. Wonderful, wonderful reserve, fantastic birds, fantastic habitat, but yeah, these are a bit boring, aren't they? So one of my jobs at the reserve was really to make sure that in the spring, come April, when these guys came back, that there was suitable habitat for it. So basically all they want is short grass. So they're only on the reserve really for 6 weeks. The rest of the time I could do anything on that bit of land, as long as when they came back the grass was short. So we had about a dozen different graziers on different parts of the reserve, and they put their sheep and cattle on. As long as they weren't on during the breeding season, didn't really matter whether they put a couple of cattle on all year in a field, or whether they put 20 on just the week or two before the lapwings came back. So that's all I had to do. It's quite easy. And it's the same with other birds, really. You know, if you're a woodpecker, all you need are trees, isn't it? But the exciting thing that I find with butterflies and moths is that they're fussy. And for a lot of our species, particularly in Scotland, we know very, very little about them. Particularly their distribution, but also about their food plants and why you get a species that, say, is on birch, commonest tree in Scotland, but may only occur in the Cairngorms. We've got a very rare micro moth that feeds on birch that is only up Glen Affric. Why is that? Nobody knows. So it's exciting going out, looking for these things and trying to find out why they're only in these sites. So before I start, I'm going to take you all back to primary school and take you through the life cycle of a butterfly or a moth, because if you look in different books, there's different terms. So I've chosen the orange tip, which I think you'd all be familiar with. In this case, the male and the female look very different. It's the males that are bright and handsome with the orange wingtips. The females are dowdier. They're also called imagos. They mate, so you can see it on the right, back to back. And then the female has to be a fantastic botanist, because she only lays her eggs on the base of the flowers of either of cuckoo flower or hedge mustard. So, I mean, to me, that is just remarkable. And they can sense their plant with sensors in their feet. More than that, if a female has laid that egg on an isolated plant, a very small plant, there's probably only enough food there, because they feed on the developing seeds, for one caterpillar. So if a second orange tip finds that plant, first of all, she will check to see whether there's another egg there. Because if there is, and she lays her egg there, then her caterpillar could then be dinner for the first caterpillar. They can be cannibalistic if food is in short supply. So as I say, they're superb botanists. They're very fussy with what they feed on. In this case, they're only feeding on the developing seeds of the cuckoo flower, and then they pupate or in a chrysalis, and then they turn into an adult or an imago. So all our species, all our 37, 38 butterflies in Scotland, our 1,300 different moths, all go through that life cycle, but they all do it slightly differently. Most of them take a year to go round there. Some of them, if we ever get another decent summer, some species like common blue can actually go round that life cycle twice. Only happens occasionally in Scotland, but it happens very regularly down in the south of England. Some species take a couple of years to go around that life cycle. So if you go at the top of some of your hills around here, I'm sure you're all familiar with the big hairy caterpillars, northern eggers. They're a big caterpillar, they're feeding on heather. It's probably not that particularly nutritious. You know, they're a caterpillar for 18 months. The record in Scotland is the goat moth. Again, it's a big moth, it's feeding on live wood. So they're inside birch trees or oak trees, and they are a caterpillar probably for 7 or 8 years, maybe more. So a long, long time before they come out. And then they're only an adult for probably a week or two. And also it's a species that doesn't feed as an adult. So it's probably spent 90–95% of its life, if not more, as a caterpillar. Now, most of our species, probably the majority of them, overwinter as a caterpillar. But they all, you can find different species do different things. So a few of them will overwinter as an egg, some will overwinter as a pupa, and some of them will overwinter as an adult. Now, we're really fortunate in butterfly conservation that we've got an army of volunteers that go out there and do a lot of recording. Butterflies are fairly obvious. On the whole, they're easy to identify, and they're fantastic indicator species. So through gathering lots of data, we can use them as the canaries of the countryside to see how sort of biodiversity and how nature is faring. And every 5 years, we produce one of these documents. You can see the one on the left is the state of UK's butterflies, and the one on the right is the state of Britain's larger moths. So this is giving us a snapshot of how our butterflies and moths are doing every 5 years. So what I really want to do is to encourage you guys to go out there and record butterflies and moths wherever you are. I'll show you a wee app that we've got to do that, because all this data is really useful so we can see how species are faring. Because to many people, particularly my colleagues who work for the RSPB, butterflies and moths are just bird fodder. They're not particularly interested in them. But if butterflies and moths aren't doing particularly well, then it means that birds aren't doing particularly well. So we have a vast number of records. So on the NBN, there's more now. I think we're up to 51 million records of butterflies and moths. It's the largest data set of insects in the whole world. So how are our butterflies doing? There's two ways of monitoring populations. One is occurrence and one is abundance. In terms of occurrence, so occurrence is just dots on the map. You can see here that anything in red is declining. You can see the 0 there, and anything in blue is increasing. So as with everything, it's a mixed picture, but alarmingly, twice as many species of butterfly are declining than are increasing. So that's in terms of occurrence. In terms of abundance, this is more difficult to measure. We have volunteers who go out once a week and walk a butterfly transect. They walk the same route once a week and count all the butterflies they see in an imaginary box. We have about 1,000 of these across the country, and because everybody's doing it the same way, that data is very robust. And from that, we can work out abundance and we can work out population trends. And you can see there, again, sadly, it's a similar position, that over half the species are declining in terms of their abundance and just under half are increasing. And you can see there over those half that there's quite a lot that have increased over 100%. So there's a few species that are doing very, very well. If we look at moths, again, there's just a general decline in the population of moths. We don't have any robust monitoring in terms of abundance, but we can monitor moths in terms of their occurrence. And you can see there that there's been a 30% reduction. And I'm sure you all see that, even I can remember the days of, driving the car or going out on your bike, coming back from the pub, and you would just see moths in your headlights, wouldn't you? I mean, it still happens, and it still happens here, but they're not as abundant. And it's even worse down south. Now, in terms of butterflies, you can split most butterflies into one of two categories. Wider countryside species, which are, as the name suggests, they're not particularly fussy. You'll find them in most habitats. And habitat specialists, so these are the rarer ones. The ones a little bit like the orange tip that will only feed on one particular food plant. And in terms of how they're doing, the red line is the wider countryside species, the blue line is the habitat specialists. And you can see there the top graph shows the occurrence, and the bottom graph shows the abundance. And it's quite simple there that you can see that the red line is above the blue line, and therefore that shows that the wider countryside species are doing better, but these habitat specialists are the ones that tend to be struggling. And these are the ones, therefore, that we tend to work on in terms of conservation, because they're more threatened. And in terms of the numbers, you can see there, in occurrence and abundance, the wider countryside ones have sort of gone down by about a quarter, but it's a bit more alarming for those habitat specialists. So they're the ones that are really in trouble. And by having all this data, it really helps us determine which are the priority species, which are the ones that are in more urgent need of our help. And one good thing is that things are better in Scotland than in England. You can see there that the Scottish line is above the English line. And I think that's because we've just got lots of better connected semi-natural habitat. There's more room for nature. Certainly we're very, very fortunate up here in the Highlands. We've got that. Maybe a bit less so in sort of parts of the Lothians, but there's just more room for wildlife in Scotland than there is in many, many parts of England. So that's one encouraging thing. And it's particularly encouraging that you can see the blue line at the end, the very end, it's at the 100% line. So in terms of this graph, those wider countryside, this indice, the indice is the same as it was way back in 1976. But you can see these waves of, as you're probably aware, you have good years for butterflies and then poor years. And in Scotland, a lot of butterflies, and I'm sure you've all seen this, those that have lived up here for more than sort of 10, 15, 20 years, a number of species are moving north, and we assume that this is due to climate change. So the darker dots on this map are where both species were seen between 1970 and 1982, and then the orange ones are new sites where the butterfly has expanded its range and has now been seen at these sites just in the 5-year period 2010 to 2014. So I live in King, you see, right in the middle of the Highlands. I've lived there for, 25, 30 years, and in that time I have seen maybe 6 species of butterfly colonise the cairngorms. Started off with orange tip, and then it was peacocks, then it was ringlets, and then speckled woods, and then commas. Now we've got purple hair streaks, and I'm being very patient, and the next one on the list that I want to see is holly blue. So all these species are moving north, and also species are moving into Scotland. So in the last few years, white letter hair streak has crossed the border. We think it's due to climate change. We're not entirely sure, but it's very exciting when new species do arrive. It's always difficult the opposite way around to say that something's gone extinct. You can see species declining, but some species can get to such a low population level they're almost undetectable. Now, for most species of butterfly, they like living in colonies. And one of the famous species that does this is marsh fritillary. It doesn't quite come this far north, although, given climate change, it could do. And a lot of species live in these discrete areas of habitat. So all those orange sort of polygons are suitable habitat for the butterfly. And the ones with the butterfly in are where the butterfly are sites that are currently occupied. But you can see at the moment there's suitable habitat here, but there's no butterfly. So this could well be a site that we've done management work on. You can see that it's surrounded by trees. We might have been in there and felled some of the trees. We might have got the farmer to improve his grazing regime, because this species likes devil-spit scabious, and it's almost solely reliant on suitable seasonal grazing. So in a situation like this, because this habitat is suitable and it's close to that existing population, maybe in the next year or in 2 or 3 years that butterfly can colonise. So that's a good thing. So we've got this meta-population, we've got this series of linked colonies. Now it may be the next year that there's really poor weather and we lose the population at the top there, either due to poor weather or due to this boy here, this little insect. This is a parasitic wasp that lays its eggs inside the caterpillars. And because marsh fritillary, the female lays her eggs in batches of 50 to 80 at a time, if one of these wasps can find those caterpillars, a female wasp can lay their eggs inside the caterpillars of maybe a dozen caterpillars, and as they're in this web that the caterpillars are protecting themselves within, and they overwinter in that web, deep in the ground, this wasp is still able to breed. So 1 or 2 females found in one web can make a population go extinct. But fortunately, in this scenario, that population might go extinct, but then maybe in the next 2, 3, 4 years, because it's close enough to the nearest colony, hopefully it can be recolonised. And what's happening with a lot of our species is that we're losing some of these colonies, and therefore it's probably too far for, if this population survived and the one at the top survived, and then the one at the, they were the only 2 surviving ones, and then one of them was lost, they're probably too far away to recolonise. So you get habitat fragmentation and you get the isolation of the colonies, and then therefore they're quite doomed. If they have a poor year, a series of poor years and go extinct, there's just no way that they can then be recolonised because the next nearest colonies are too far away. So because of this principle of metapopulation, what we try to do is work in priority landscapes. And there's, I think there's a dozen or 15 priority landscapes there where we tend, in an ideal world in Scotland, that these are our key sites, or our key areas where we work, because these have been determined because they're home to our higher priority species. So apologies, there's no shading up here in Assynt. It doesn't mean that you've not got any rare species or priority species. It just means that you've not got a collection of them. So somewhere where I live in Badenoch and Strathspey, there's about 20 or 25 priority species, and they're the ones we tend to work in. As I say, in an ideal world, we would have people, we'd have project officers working in all these landscapes. In reality, we've probably got 3 or 4 people out on the ground working in them, but that doesn't mean we're not wanting to work in some of these areas. So what I'm going to do now is explain, some of the things we do. Myself and particularly my colleagues, where they're working and what we're trying to do for some of these scarcer species. And one thing that most conservation organisations have is this recovery curve. This is a fairly simple model, and what we're trying to do is, for these rare and threatened species, is to move them along the curve. So this is the population, and this is time, and the first thing to do is to determine their status. So that's where we need people to go out and walk these transects, do these timed counts, and just generally record them. And it may be that if the population level stays the same, it's not a priority species and it's job done. For some species, it's really difficult to go and determine their status because we have so few records, we know so little about them. But then if we find that once we've determined their status, they're starting to decline, we need to do something about it. Why are they declining? And when we can work out why they're declining, we need to start doing some trials on the ground. And then hopefully, this is an idealised graph, they'll start to recover. And then the sustainable management is when that recovery management is put into, say, agricultural schemes or put into forestry schemes. So I can take a step back, hopefully with the knowledge that these are being managed through other means. So this is what we're trying to do with our more threatened species, is move them along this recovery curve and get them from position 1 closer to position 4 or 5. I mean, it's a very idealistic graph, but it gives you a sort of idea of what we're trying to do for all our rarer species. So one of the big projects that we've just started is Species on the Edge. Hopefully you've all heard of this. Through this we have 2 project officers. It's a vast project, a very complex project in how it works. But what we're trying to do on the ground with it is quite simple. It's a collaboration. It's led by Nature Scott, but you'll see there's 7 other organisations similar to ourselves, similar to BC. So 7 other environmental NGOs, and it's superb. We've all got together. We're all working collaboratively. We've got money from Nature Scott and from the Heritage Lottery Fund. We've identified between us 37 priority species. Sadly, they're not all butterflies and moths. We've let them have a few birds and a few plants. So again, it's all about working together. Through that, we've got 9 conservation projects, and we're working across 7 different landscapes. And it's a 4.5-year project, and we're in the second year of it. So this is a big project, particularly for ourselves, for BC, because we are a relatively small organisation. It's taken probably more than 4.5 years to get this thing up and running. So now we're right in the middle of it, and it's just great that it's happening. So we're going to show you some of the things that we're trying to do. So in terms of those 9 projects, Butterfly Conservation Scotland, we've got 2 of them. And one of them has got the corny name Rockin' the Blues. Don't blame me for that. And we're focusing on 2 rare butterflies, small blue and northern brown argus. Our other project is about herb-rich pasture. And there we've got marsh fritillary as the priority species. And then we have 4 incredibly rare burnet moths that are only on the west coast of Scotland, nowhere else. And 3 of them, well, all 4 of them actually, are endemic. The subspecies are endemic and are found nowhere else in the world. And these are virtually on your doorsteps here. And over the years, we've done little bits of work on them. So this now gives us an opportunity to really find out more about them and try and move them along that recovery curve. So there's 7 areas where the project is working, and you can see them all named there, all 7 of them. Again, sorry, there's none in Assynt, but you can see what they're there, and each area is led by one of the partners. And you'll see that each area has a project officer or 2. Some of them are sort of conservation officers, some of them are people engagement officers. So in total, the project employs 18 project officers. 2 of those are working for BC. You can see there which organisations is leading on which areas. So we are leading on the east coast, but we have a project officer on Mull, and we have a project officer just outside Inverness. And this is, so it's in the Argyll and Inner Hebrides landscape where we're working on marsh fritillary and the burnets. And you can see there we're working, or the project is working on small blue along the north coast and along the east coast, and on northern brown argus on the east coast and on the Solway coast. But what's really great about this project is that different project officers, who, although they're employed, say, by RSPB, are working on other taxa. They're not just working on the birds. So the RSPB officer on Isla, who's employed through Species on the Edge, will be working on marsh fritillary. So it's really good collaborative working, you know, across the whole coast, or virtually the whole coast of Scotland. So I'm going to show you a little example on the east coast, because that's our area. So it's the one that I know most. Our project officer is Tracy Munro, who lives near Culloden. So as well as working on small blue and northern brown argus, she's also working on behalf of RSPB for their Turning the Tide project, helping to monitor those 3 species of tern, also putting out rafts and putting out signs. She's working on behalf of Plant Life, their Jewels of the North project for purple oxytropis, a very rare plant that's along the north coast of Scotland, but there's 2 populations on the east coast, just north of Inverness. And she's also working on behalf of Bug Life for this bordered brown lacewing, which is incredibly rare and is associated with wood sage. So it's a real great example of sort of cross-taxa and cross-organisation working. But because I'm here to talk about butterflies, I'll tell you a bit more about what we're trying to do for Species on the Edge for small blue. So this is one of our priority species. It's one of our habitat specialists. The butterfly is associated with kidney vetch. You can see in Scotland that there's populations up around Thurso and along the north coast. There's some good populations along the Murray Firth up to about Dornoch, and populations around Angus, and then a few inland populations, mainly on the Feshie and along the Spey in the middle of the Cairngorms. And that's it. It's a bit more common down south, but you can see there's a number of blue dots on these maps. So these are where the butterfly was previously recorded. in this case between 95 and 99, but not between 2005 and 9. So it is declining. So what we're trying to do is, well, the key thing for this butterfly is that it's not just the kidney vetch that the butterfly requires, because the caterpillars are only feeding on the flowers and then, a bit like the orange tip, on the developing seeds. So you can have a site that has lots of kidney vetch flowers, but if there's lots of rabbits on the site or sheep get into the site and they start eating the flowers, then the population will then decline. And I hope if you look very carefully, what you may be able to see there is an egg. So again, it's a useful species that you can go out and record, and you don't need to go out on a nice sunny day. You can go out in any weather, in the height of the summer, maybe for 3 or 4 weeks, and look for the eggs. And the great thing about that, as well as being able to do it in any weather, is that it confirms that it's actually a breeding site. And there's an egg just laid in the middle of the clump of the flowers, just on the calyx there. And what Tracy has done is, through training a number of volunteers, many of whom are very new, is actually get them out and do some survey work. So you can just about see all these blue butterflies. Each of those sites where that butterfly is, she's set up some monitoring in terms of a timed count. But more importantly, those named sites of Dornoch, Logie, Ardasea and Nairn, we've set up one of these butterfly transects. So that is really, really good, because we have never until now been able to know how small blue is faring in Scotland. And this is a really good start. Having all these sites monitored with the combination of the transects and the time counts will give us lots of robust data. And in 5 years' time, that's what the statisticians tell me, we'll have sufficient data to tell whether small blue is increasing or not. We'll also be able to tell how our management, because we're undertaking different types of management at some of these sites, whether that's actually improving the fortunes of the butterfly. So to us, this is really, really exciting, having somebody on the ground, able to go out, able to work with local communities, infuse them, give them training. Some of it's online, some of it's in the field, some of it's, like this, where we talk in a village hall. Infuse folk, get them out to their local sites, and then get them to survey and monitor for, in this case, for small blue. We're also engaging with lots of landowners. So this is at Logie Quarry, just south of Tame. This is on Balnagown Estate. This is the factor, and we've been working with Callum now for about 4 years. It took us about 2 or 3 years to get over the threshold on this site. And it just shows it takes a while to build up those relationships with landowners. If somebody came to me and knocked on the door trying to sell me something, I'm not going to buy it from them. But if they came regularly, and you got to know them, got a bit of trust, then you can start to build that relationship. And it's just the same here. When I first went to see Callum, he'd never heard of butterfly conservation, never heard of small blue. Of course, didn't like the looks of me turning up to not to tell him, but to say you've got this rare butterfly on your land. Nobody had ever told him or asked permission to go on his land. Not that you really necessarily need to do that. So immediately he's defensive. But after 2 or 3 years, then you can start to work with him, and we've cleared a lot of scrub. We've really enhanced the population of small blue there, so much so that he put the estate and put our work up for an award in the Scottish Land and Estates Conservation category, in which we were the runners-up. So fantastic news story there, and really good, working together and getting that accolade. And also we've got the local MP out. That was, it's not letting me go back, but that doesn't matter. That was Jamie Stone, the local MP, came out. But this is this is the other bread and butter of what we're doing through Species on the Edge, actually going out to sites and making a difference. So this is us walking out. It was about a 2-mile walk out to the bar at Culbin to clear scrub for small blue. The top 2 photos are at a site at Old Shandwick, where we've cleared lots of scrub off some very, very steep cliffy slopes, and then throwing it all down on the beach to burn, as well as having a bit of a barbecue. And then, this is some happy volunteers clearing scrub at Fort George on the MOD land there, just at Ardasea. So it's getting these local people out there, getting them involved, and actually trying to make a difference for these species. So it's really, really encouraging. And then the other thing we do, which is really important, is to actually go and not just monitor the butterfly, but monitor the habitat. So these squares here are at the golf course at Lossiemouth, just to the west of Lossiemouth, where in each of those squares is where we have counted the abundance of kidney vetch flowers. So we've gone in and done that, and we'll do this probably every second year, and that will tell us whether our management and whether the kidney vetch is expanding, and therefore hopefully we're creating more habitat for the butterfly. And then we write this up and send it as a report to all the landowners so they know what's happening on their land, what we've done, and whether we've been successful or not, along with the butterfly counts. So again, keeping them in the loop and keeping them enthused. And to do all this, you need somebody enthusiastic and on the ground to keep all these plates spinning. And this is a lovely example at Ardesea, although actually I've misspelt it. So this is, we created some butterfly banks. So these are small sandy mounds on which we will plant kidney vetch for the butterfly, for small blue. Now this is working with Scottish Water because it's next to their sewage treatment works. The sand was given free of charge by Haventus, who are the company who are developing Port Ardesea. The local contractor, who we'd already used before clearing scrub on the dunes at Nairn, he was happy to come and give us a digger driver and his kit for 2 days. Didn't cost us anything. With the local school, the local primary school, they are the ambassador school for small blue. They've been growing seeds of kidney vetch and planting them out there. And you can see on the right there, we had a raking team that went out and raked the butterfly banks. And that's John Orr there, one of the Highland Council rangers. So it was a lovely sort of group of different individuals and companies helping us, trying to do something positive for this butterfly. So I think it's a lovely, lovely story, and we should be trying to do more of this. Just getting people involved. Any age, and trying to do something positive for these rarer species. Now we go over to the burnets. So this is the New Forest burnet. Despite its name, it sadly no longer occurs in the New Forest. Became extinct in 1927, and then remarkably in 1966 somebody found it on these steep south-facing cliffs in Argyll. I mean, incredible. And this still remains the sole site for this moth in the whole of the country. It's a very small area. It's probably only on maybe a couple of hectares. Very lovely species-rich undercliff. But the issue was that there was too many sheep, and it was difficult to keep the sheep off the site. We had put a fence up, but the fence kept being dislodged through landslips. So we would go out there with volunteers. I mean, it's probably a good hour and a half's walk out to this site. The issue here was that the estate, they were happy to have the moth there, but they weren't happy and didn't have the money to put up a new fence. They weren't prepared to sort of dig out the fence from all the rubble that had come down. So you can see us there, we went out with new fence posts. You can see somebody in the background banging in stobs. We tightened the wires, but it kept happening. So for 2 winters, the fence kept going like this. So eventually we got some money, and we got the helicopters in, we got a professional fencer, and you can see on the right hand side a new fence, and we left what was remained of the old fence up in the hope that that would save the new fence, so any new debris that comes down. So this is sort of, severe or fairly extreme conservation. This is incredibly steep slopes. You really can't get that from this picture. And the idea through Species on the Edge is to now extend this fence and create other areas where we can reduce the grazing. We still need to do some grazing, because if not, the grass will get too tall, too rank. The wildflowers that the moth is reliant on will get swamped out. But having that fence up there with a couple of gates enables us to do some controlled grazing. So we're trying to expand the area and maybe put up a fence maybe half a mile away from this fence in the hope that the moth will colonise. So that's what we're doing with the very rare New Forest burnet. The Talisker burnet is equally rare. It's a subspecies of the narrow-bordered 5-spot burnet, which is quite common down south. And again, this was only found in Scotland on Skye in 1963, and it was then found to be a unique subspecies. And it just occurs in these 4 sites on the west coast of Skye, nowhere else. And they're very, very difficult sites on the whole to get to. And you can see here, these are these little grassy ledges at the base of these basalt cliffs. That's what the moth likes. And a lot of the sites are, you've really got to go in with a boat or walk around to some of them at low tide. They're quite precarious. The sites were monitored in 2006, and then last year we got a contractor to go to Skye for 2 weeks to try and repeat that monitoring. As you're all aware, the weather was awful in the summer. He managed to get to all the sites, but hardly in the right weather. So we're hoping to repeat that. And he'll go to each of these named sites. This is at Talisker Bay North. All the other sites are equally named and numbered so that we can determine how this moth is faring. You know, this incredibly rare moth that only occurs on Skye, nowhere else in Britain. And it's a similar story for this one. This is probably one of my favourite moths, the transparent burnet. Again, it's on these steep slopes. This species requires wild thyme. It's a little bit more widespread. Doesn't occur anywhere else in the UK, only on the west of Scotland. You can see there it's on Skye, it's on Mull, it's on Canna. There's a few sites around Oban. It's on the very tip of the Mull of Kintyre. I don't know whether you've got any basalt cliffs up here, probably not, but it does seem to like these steep basalt cliffs where on a nice sunny day the cliffs are a bit like a radiator. You know, they're reflecting the heat, and the vegetation is quite short. There's a lot of bare ground, there's a lot of rock slip. You know, it's at an angle that you would put your solar panel. They're south-facing sites, so it's that really, really warm microclimate that this particular moth requires. And that is it. So again, we're trying to encourage people out to look for the moth at these sites. You know, you can see the yellow dots are where the moth hasn't been seen since 2000. So we haven't got a full picture of how it's doing. We're trying to set up monitoring. So yeah, and it's a gorgeous, really easy to identify moth. Wonderful thing, the transparent burnet. So that's a very quick whiz through species on the edge. And I feel a bit guilty that I've told you all about species that you can't see around here. So now you've got to wake up and listen, because I'm going to set you some homework, as it were. So large heath is a butterfly associated with bog cotton, and you can see its distribution map there. And again, sadly, you can see lots of blue, either circles or crosses, where the butterfly has not been seen since 2014. The red and orange dots are where the butterfly was seen between 2015 and 2019. And look at all the blue on that map. Now, this butterfly is it's red listed in the GB terms, but it's also in Scottish terms the only butterfly that occurs in Scotland that is red listed in Europe. So it's a really, really high priority for us. And we've been doing almost next to nothing on it. What we have been doing on some of the lowland sites, so these sites in the central belt, we've got a lovely project called Bog Squad, run by Polly here, and she goes out with local volunteers, and it's with peatland action money. You've probably all seen the big diggers up on the hills restoring peatland. Well, we do it on a much smaller scale through peatland action with volunteers. So we're damming, hand damming dams, and also pulling out scrub with hand tools. But we've done nothing really with all of these populations here. So what we're trying to do is, as of next year, try and encourage people to go out to some of these sites and try and record to see whether this butterfly is still there. It's going to be a very difficult species to monitor, because you'd have to go to these sites to set up a transect once a week during July or June, July. You know, the sites are probably pretty windswept. Some of them are quite upland. We had a meeting yesterday, I think it was, with RSPB at Forsenard and UHI at Thurso, about trying to set up a project here and try and all the restoration work that's happening in the flow country, see whether it's actually benefiting large heath, see what techniques are working better for the butterfly. So we're in the process of trying to do that at the moment and trying to improve our knowledge and try and get that status assessment, because we really don't know, that stage 1 on the recovery curve, we really don't know how large heath is faring in Scotland. And as you can see from that map, you know, Scotland has probably got, what, 80% of the population? So it's a bit embarrassing that we don't really know how it's faring. It's not easy, but that shouldn't stop us trying to give it a go. So there's a challenge for you to get out and look for large heath. I'll give you my contact details at the end. And another of our priority species is yellow ringed carpet. And what is really intriguing about this species is that there's sort of 2 populations. So where I am in the Cairngorms here, the moth here seems to feed, we think, mainly on mossy or yellow mountain saxifrage. And if you look at the flight periods for northeast Scotland, it's the moth seems to come out in July and end in end of August, September. And then it's out as a caterpillar here, and then it overwinters as a small caterpillar and comes out again and feeds in probably April and May and then turns into an adult. So it's got this 1-year life cycle. But bizarrely, in the northwest of Scotland, so where you are, it has 2 peaks. So it's out on the wing in May and June, and then it tails off, and then these adults will be laying eggs, and there'll be caterpillars around here, and then they'll turn into adults, and then they'll be laying eggs, and it will, like the populations with me in the Cairngorms, they'll also overwinter as a small larvae and come out in the spring, but it seems to be able to have these 2 generations. And the other difference is that although they're feeding on saxifrages with me, we think they're feeding on stone crops over on the west coast. And we've got so few records for it, particularly caterpillar records, which are so important to tell us, you know, not just where they're breeding, but what type of habitat, what type of stone crop does it like? What species of stone crop? Is it the stone crop on the, you know, more sheltered areas, on the vertical crags? Is it on the more open areas? So I've been out looking for it in the Cairngorms, and this is the sort of place, you know, where I look for it. You've got these lovely rocky burns, and on the burns there's clumps of either yellow mountain saxifrage or mossy saxifrage. And simply what you do is you put a net under that and you tickle. You need a good tickling technique, and hopefully the caterpillars will fall out into your net. You can also use one of these. This is a carvac that runs off, it's got a wee rechargeable battery, and then when the battery runs out, I just use a power pack. And using that on, you can see there the yellow mountain saxifrage, then I was able to hoover up a few caterpillars. So I have tried it a little bit on the west coast. I've tried it on Mull. I was on Mull in April this year, and I did try it, but I only found a little bit of stone crop, and I was only able to do it for an hour or so, and I wasn't able to find the caterpillars. So there's a challenge for you to go out tickling stone crop and look for this lovely, well-marked caterpillar. So there we go. So a patch of stone crop like that, you can easily put your hat under there, your umbrella, you know, open up your bag, put a butterfly net, give that a good tickle and see what drops into it. But there is, as always, it's not always straightforward. In terms of the adult, there is a very similar moth grey mountain carpet, but this feeds mainly on blaeberry, but it is quite common in Scotland in the uplands. You can see there, but it is a species that you can see there's not many black dots there. There's a lot of yellow without any orange, or without any purple or black centres, which shows that the moth's not been seen there since 2000. So this moth does seem to be contracting away from the coast inland. We're not quite sure why, but you can see it's still, certainly on the west, there's still quite a few black dots. So you might find the adults of that, which do look very, very similar, and also the caterpillars look very similar. And they have just this 1-year life cycle out in July and August. So if you're tickling near particularly blaeberry or heather, then don't get too overexcited, because you could potentially have found grey mountain carpet caterpillars. Now I'm going to move to the cairngorms. This is the dark-bordered beauty. We have two populations of this in Scotland, and there's just one in England. Things are very different in Scotland to England. In England, this moth feeds on creeping willow. In Scotland, it is on aspen. It's a very rare species. It's one of these ones that's incredibly fussy, and what it likes is short aspen suckers. And you can see here we've put up an electric fence. It's hardly rocket science, and where the sheep can't get access, on the left we've got these lovely suckers coming up, and on the right hand side, outside the fence, then the suckers are just sort of grazed right down. So we've set up temporary exclosures like this at a number of sites. This particular site and a number of others, we've now got permanent fencing in. The trouble is that these suckers then get too tall for the moth. Once they get to about my height, or 2 meters, or the height of the ceiling here, for whatever reason, the moth turns its nose up at them. So we have to go in and either let the sheep back in or go in and clear areas with hand tools. But the moth does seem to be benefiting from that management, but it does only occupy some very small areas of habitat. So we have been very concerned about it, so much so that it's the only species in Scotland that we're actually doing a translocation. So we've been working with the Highland Wildlife Park. They've been rearing the caterpillars, and then we've been releasing adults and eggs and caterpillars at a secret site in the cairngorms. So we've done that 2 years ago, and it seems to be working. We're still a bit nervous to say that. Oh, sorry. And again, it won't let me go back. But that was just to show you the people who how excited, and lots of smiley faces of people there the first time we released the caterpillars. Another rare Scottish moth with the wrong name, Kentish glory, used to occur in Kent. And this one is associated with birch, but only occurs in the cairngorms and Culbin Forest, nowhere else. Again, it's fussy because it likes, a bit like dark-bordered beauty, it likes young birch up to about 2 meters high. The female lays her eggs in batches, but it's quite a difficult species to record. The males, a bit like emperor moths, fly like mad during the day. Very, very difficult to record. You can go and look for the caterpillars and look for the egg batches, but that doesn't excite a number of our volunteers. They'd rather go out and look for the adults. You can see there the 4 populations, and the coloured dots where it used to occur many, many years ago down south. It was last seen in England in, I think, 1976. And what we've been doing for this species is we've been developing a pheromone lure. So inside each of these netted bags, you can see there's that's just a plastic vial, that's a rubber tube, and there's a glass vial. And in there is a man-made version of the female pheromone. So we've been trying to use this to detect the males to try and put more dots on the map. And what was remarkable, that when you did this, we were getting moths going to the glass one, but for some reason they weren't going to the other 2. They were flying, most of them were flying around the lure, but they were flying about 10-20 meters downwind. They weren't approaching the actual pheromone. So we thought that we had some missing ingredient. When you go out with a female, if you find the caterpillars and rear them and then get the females to emerge, before they've mated and they are putting out the pheromone, if you take one of those out, which I do in a bird feeder, nice little cage for them, it's amazing, then the males will come directly to her and they'll completely ignore our man-made poor substitute. So we still need to do some more work on it. We did wonder whether they needed a visual clue, because this is quite a big moth, so that perhaps they were coming to the scent, but then once they've got them to the general area, they're actually looking for the moth. So we made these lovely fuzzy felt female Kentish glories, and no, it didn't work. It fooled us many times, because we put these right by the lure, and then you glance around and think, yes, there's a moth. So again, it's just another thing trying to find out the status of this moth and get volunteers involved to help us do that and have a bit of fun at the same time. So that's Kentish glory. Now this really, really handsome beast only occurs at a couple of sites, and one of which is Ben A, and it feeds on the prostate juniper that's probably about, I don't know, maybe about 2,000 feet up the hill. And you can see here on the juniper, if you look carefully, you can see these spinnings. So you can go up in the summer, in sort of June, July, and look for those spinnings, and then I think the adults are out probably earlier in the year in May. But a really, really spectacular thing. Literally only known from a couple of sites, and they're all in this area. So the juniper conch. And another thing for you to look out for is Poronex alpicola that is on Mountain Everlasting. And you can see that it creates, first of all, it bends over the leaf, and the caterpillar's inside there feeding, hence the sort of brownness on the leaf. And then when the caterpillar gets a bit bigger, it then folds the whole leaf over, and it's then pupated. You can see all the silk there. And this is known from Inverness, and that's it. And that picture is of a Poronex, but it's not Poronex alpicola because we don't have a picture of the adult. It's that rare. So if you know anywhere where there's mountain avens, please go out and look for these feeding signs, because I mean it must be at lots of or at some other sites. That's where we need to work more closely with the botanist and try and find where these sites are. So again, just up on the north coast is where the only site for this moth is. So I'm going to quickly take you over to the dark side and try and encourage you to do a bit of moth trapping. So those that don't know, this is a moth trap. It's just a big bulb on a bucket. We have a volunteer group with butterfly conservation in the Highlands, so it's the Highland branch. They're mostly based in Inverness and the Cairngorms, but they do run events sort of further afield. So if you want them to come up here and do anything or look for anything, or just run some moth traps, then just let us know. They do actually have some spare moth traps. We've been donated, over the years we've been donated quite a lot of moth traps from different people. Most of them go and find good homes, but sometimes they then come back to us. So I think at the moment we've got a couple of moth traps. So if anybody wants to borrow a moth trap, this one here plugs into the main, so it's a really bright light. You need quite good neighbours or tolerant neighbours. Maybe that's not an issue up here. And I think we've also got little battery ones that run off a little 12-volt battery that are a bit more portable that you can go put out in the wild. And the great thing about moth trapping is that every morning's like Christmas, because when you get up, you get so excited, and sometimes, like in this case, Santa delivers. Look at all those wonderful moths that are there, and other times, yeah, it's a bit boring, and you don't get much. It might be too cold or too wet. And all you get is maybe a horrible jumper from your aunt or a pair of socks. So, but yeah, it's well worth getting into, really exciting. And you'll get large numbers, you can see there. Can be a bit daunting when you first start, trying to identify all these things. But most things now, and if you take a half decent photo, somebody will help you. The moth community and the butterfly community are very, very helpful and encouraging if you're starting out. You don't always need a moth trap. If you go out during the evening and at night to plants like ragwort or buddleia, where you've seen lots of butterflies or hoverflies feeding, or early in the year on the willows, if you go out there at night with a torch, the moths will be there. But if you mix your black treacle, some nice dark beer and some brown sugar, put it together, heat it up on the hob, put a wee tot of rum in it, and then paint it on fence posts or tree trunks. You can get lots of moths in the evenings coming to feed on the sugar. So that's again something that's worth doing. There's a really good app called What's Flying Tonight, and if you download it on your phone or go on the website, you put in your postcode, it knows the date, and this was probably put in. These are mostly, I don't know, moths you'd find in maybe May. It comes up with how many records there have been of each species, not just in your 10-kilometre square, it also uses the ones in adjacent squares. So this is a really, really good and helpful way to start. I mean, you may find things that are not on here, but the chances are that you're going to find common things and they will be in the top few of this list. So that's a really, really good, helpful guide. Also on our East Scotland branch website, you'll recognise some of these maps and these flight charts. Well, I've just snapped them from there. We've got really accurate distribution maps of all our moths, not just the macro moths, also the micro moths and the butterflies, just for Scotland, and really accurate flight charts, which again really, really help you when you're trying to identify these things in terms of their distribution and when they're on the wing. So there's lots and lots of resources like this that are out there. This new book has just been published. I think it probably came out in April or May. So a book just on the largest Scottish moths. Wonderful photos and commentary by Roy Leverton, and Mark Cubitt did all the technical wizardry with all the maps and everything. So it's a fantastic, fantastic book. It's really good that we've got a book just on Scottish moths. And then another good resource on the right hand side, this is a Highland Butterfly Atlas. We used to produce it probably every 10 years or so in paper form, but it's now online. If you go to our Butterfly Conservation website and look on the branches and on the Highland branch, you will find it there. And each of these dots are at 5 kilometre resolution, whereas most of the maps I've shown you tonight are 10 kilometre. And also the flight charts are just for the Highlands. So again, that's a really, really good resource. And then this is a really good app for recording butterflies. I record butterfly. So I mean, I use this a lot when I'm out out walking or out on my bike. Your phone knows the date, it knows where you are. It'll also give you a list of species that are known in that area. You just click on the one you see, put the number in, job done. And then when you get home, you just press the button to send, and it gets sent automatically to the local butterfly recorder. It's amazing, really, really easy to use. And we're getting lots of records that way. So again, those casual sightings when you're out, particularly when you're out in the wilds a bit, it's really useful. You probably all know about cool links. The man on the right is Mark Young, who used to be a trustee for butterfly conservation, and the man on the left is Phil Sterling, who used to work for butterfly conservation. Mark stood as an expert witness in 2019 for the original inquiry, and we wheeled him out again last month for the hearing session, because the site has got a very rich assemblage of scarce butterflies and moths. So again, we only know that because our volunteers have been there and recorded them and then sent those records in. So we were able to tell the reporters there, how many species, and we had 100 more species on our list than the developer did, and that was also without the landowner. The landowner refused permission for us to go and do any recording on the site, and some very, very rare species. So the hearing was the middle of, well, it says there, 11th to the 15th of November. We've just done our closing submissions that have been sent in, and it's up to the reporters now to write up the whole inquiry, make their recommendations to Scottish ministers, and then it's up to the Scottish ministers to do either rubber stamp that or not. So I think it's a classic case of environment against development. But we put up, as did our RSPB and BugLife, a very strong conservation coalition. And I think in terms of the conservation, I think we just completely knocked it out of the park. Their ecologists didn't have a leg to stand on. So I'm confident that from the environment point of view that we won it hands down, but sadly that's not where all the arguments will be made. So yeah, I don't know when we will hear, but probably not till the summer, maybe late spring. But again, it's really good having, and they both did this as volunteers, so it's fantastic. So as I said before, we run a number of events. This is us up Glen Affric, looking for this rare moth that only occurs up there, the Affric twitcher. Lots of folk coming along, some very knowledgeable folk there, some real newbies coming along to get a taste. Everybody's welcome, they're all free. You don't have to be a member of BC, they're good fun. You're meeting like-minded folk. Hopefully you learn a little bit and people contribute because people come along with different skills. I've mentioned lots of work parties. This is us at Cool Links, at Logie Quarry, were these wonderful things, tree poppers that pull out the scrub out the ground, so there's no need for any chemicals, and they're lovely to use, good fun to use, but you know when you've been using one or popping all day. And we go out in any weather. So this was an event a few years ago in the spring. So we never cancel our events. If the weather's too bad, don't come, but somebody will be there. We have various resources. Most of them now, sadly, are all online. So we have this butterfly chart with information about all our species of butterfly in Scotland, and we have a common moths leaflet. But there are leaflets about the burnet moths, we've got one on small blue, northern brown argus, marsh fritillary, most of the rarest species. There'll be a leaflet online. And lastly, if you want to know more, we put out a quarterly Scottish newsletter. So you can just sign up for that and it will appear in your inbox. It's nothing fancy. All the different project officers, we all contribute something each quarter. Some of our key volunteers do. It just lets you know what people have been up to, but also more importantly, advertises whatever events are happening. Audrey sends out updates of events that are happening in the Highland branch. If you want any information or any questions, you can either email just our generic Scotland email address or me, and then Tracy is the Species on the Edge project officer in Inverness, and Liz is the project officer on Mull. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with anybody, and there's my number. So anything you want to know about, then we're more than happy to get, because we need more people to get involved. And to help with common species and the rarer species. So I'm a bit of a whiz through what we're doing in a little bit of what we're doing in Scotland. Any questions? Well, I've bamboozled you.
There was a micro on prostrate juniper only high in the hills, was it?
Yes, it's about 2/3 of the way up Ben A.
Right.
But I mean, it could be elsewhere. It does seem to be just on the prostrate juniper.
Well, that's the only one we get round here anyway. Around as far as in the neighbour when it changes, but it curves right down to sea level.
Yeah.
Not very high, curiously.
Well,
1,000 foot, so unlikely.
Well, to be honest, I don't think we know.
No.
Few people have seen that moth, and what tends to happen is a few people that want to see it go to the site, because you can find juniper on the path up to Ben A, and that's where they look for it, and of course that's where, with a bit of luck, they then find it. What you then need to do is need your local expertise to know where, first of all, perhaps where there's juniper in similar habitat elsewhere, and look for it. But then, who knows? It could be on some of the stuff nearer the shore, or higher up, or lower down. But I mean, it's a very, very distinctive moth, as you saw. Looking for the spinnings is a bit, a bit more subtle. But you can see it. Once you've half an hour until having a good look, and then let your eyes uncross and a cup of tea, and then have another look. So it is doable.
Quite a lot of yellow mountain saxifrage here, but do you think the carpet?
Yeah, yellow ring cup. Yeah, who knows? Yeah,
Is it easy to find a picture of the caterpillar?
It is. Yes. I thought I had. I think the slide jumped on. Just see if it will go.
I think we might have to stop the recording.
I can show you perhaps over. I'll put it up on the screen at the tea break. But yeah, it's a lovely caterpillar with nice chevrons on, and because it's a geometer moth, so it looks a bit like, sits a bit like a butterfly. It's your classic cartoon looper caterpillar.
Oh, right.
I think the two local lots are our two moth traps.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah,
they're in the right place.
But yeah, it would be really interesting. I mean, that would be fantastic to know. Have you got both populations here? And is the saxifrage one just single brooded, and is the one that's on stonecrop double brooded, or are they both double brooded? And it's the fact that it's a bit milder here, and they can get, they can fit two broods in. Don't know.
Does it go on rose root? Does it the big stonecrop you get on the cliffs?
Yeah, I've not got any records of that, but who's looked?
Yeah.
So it does seem to be feeding on the flowers and the seeds. But
I mean, that's the most conspicuous. Well, English stonecrop's pretty common, but there's a chunky great rosary.
Yeah.
which is back on the coast and up on the hills as well.
Yeah,
Is it on English? Is it?
I think so. Yes.
That picture
Yeah.
was English, the one
Yeah.
you showed.
Yeah.
What's the yellow one? Is the yellow one biting, Stoer?
Yeah, that's a dune species and pretty uncommon here.
Right.
Lots of English.
Yeah.
Do we sometimes get migrating species?
Oh yes. So you're probably familiar with red admirals and painted ladies. They're migrant butterflies. So the painted ladies can't survive anywhere in Britain in the winter, and we're reliant on them coming probably mostly from Morocco. And as they come north in the spring, and they're probably as early as February, across sort of Spain and France, they'll be laying their eggs on thistles, and then that'll be another generation, and they then move north, and then maybe get into England, and then we may get that generation or the following generation coming up to Scotland.
A few years ago, we had a huge number of painted ladies.
Yeah.
Where have you lived?
Well, yeah, it's superb, isn't it, when you get those really, really good migrant years for them. So it just depends if the winds are right when they set off early in the year and then have another good blast of wind behind them and they come here. Because they feed on thistles, once they're here, they're happy. It's just getting them here. And if you do get conditions like that, then there may be slightly scarcer things like hummingbird hawk moths. There's been a few of those around this year, and striped hawk moths. So that there's a number of much smaller migratory moths. Well, the commonest one is diamondback. That can be a tiny, tiny little moth, and it has got little zigzags along its back, and it feeds on crucifers and brassicas, and it can be really, really, really common. But that's a migrant. I'd probably hear all the year, but it's really increased by the number of migrants that come across.
Years back, there was hundreds and hundreds of them. I remember.
Yes. Yeah.
Put on the website.
Is silver white totally migratory, or it's numbers? It is a migratory species, isn't it? Or
It's very much a migratory species. I don't know whether any survive regularly in Scotland. I think not. So I would classify them like painted ladies.
Perhaps, isn't it? Yeah.
It is if you get a good year. This year was quite a fairly poor year. There was a lot around at one, maybe in the spring. And then I certainly hardly caught any. I think there was a lot around the coast rather than in the centre of Scotland.
Just to go back to the painted lady, because butterflies aren't really my thing. I know what happens sometimes. So they're having these generations, if you like, but dogs are little migratory, they must go back again, but no. So it's the generations that they leave behind are the ones that start it next year again.
Well, there is some evidence of them going back. Have been found on the English Channel trying to get across and probably going back quite high. The classic species that does it is the monarch in America. Where there's a population in some wooded valleys in Mexico. That's where they roost, en masse, literally by their millions. They then move north, laying eggs, and then you get a second generation that carry on moving north, and then possibly a third generation. So you can end up with the grandbairns or the great-grandbairns of the original ones in Arctic Canada, and they then go all the way back to the same wood that their grandparents or great-grandparents were at. So I think it's clever, the swallows coming back to the same nest, or the ospreys. Well, that's nothing, is it? Well, that insect can do it over 3 or 4 generations. And there's some evidence that... Yeah, that's in 1 year.
Just want to check where we could get advice on management grazing regime for maximising butterfly moth diversity. Is that something we can get through you?
Yes.
Croft here.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time giving advice to farmers and landowners and trying to help them get into the scheme.
So would you come and do a site visit, or?
Yes, try to. Depends, how busy we are, but yes, it could be something we could do through Species on the Edge.
Okay.
So where is your croft?
So it's about 5 miles north of here.
Right.
But it's not a very big croft. It goes down. It's north facing. Goes down to the shoreline.
Right. Okay.
Got quite a few species.
Yeah.
Scotch Argus.
Yep.
Dark green and
speckled wood.
dark green patera and the what's the other small bordered patera?
Yes,
speckled
okay.
wood, yeah,
Yeah.
about at least 10 species. But I'm just not sure about how to manage. You know, some parts of it are obviously good for
Yeah.
some species, and other parts for others. And obviously, deer are everywhere. We're not fenced, and then we do have some sheep that we borrow to graze, but I'm not sure about what sort of grazing pressure they have. So it'd be great to have
Yeah. Okay.
an expert.
Well, I'll take your details and see what we
Yeah,
can do. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you, Tom. That was great. Just want to make you want to go out and find butterflies and moths, but not at the moment, obviously. But I think maybe there's something that we can do next spring, summer. I've just got some ideas buzzing around. But thanks so much for coming, and everyone give them a good hand.